Hi, everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So feel free to grab your lunch and find a seat. We have plenty. So welcome to our presentation today. Very, very special event and a special person to present it, special to me especially. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Araxia Aritunian. You've been RSVPing to me. I'm a psychologist and I work at the DSPS office. My primary role there is to conduct learning disabilities assessments for LAMC students. Another passion and also background of mine is to work with individuals on the autism spectrum. And so when we had an opportunity to start a program called Uniquely Abled Academy, I jumped at it. So especially when I found out the purpose of the Uniquely Abled Academy. One being to shift a societal paradigm from the disabled to the uniquely abled. And the second being to facilitate more opportunities of vocation and finding jobs for these uniquely abled students. So in other words, we want to see our students with autism, see their unique abilities, and match them with job opportunities that utilize those strengths in them, those unique abilities. So I have been working with a group of students in the Uniquely Abled Academy, teaching them soft skills and practicing interviewing skills and other skills, kind of social skills, to first be successful in college and successfully complete their respective programs, and then to find them job opportunities that bring up those unique abilities in them. And you as faculty and staff have been a major part of that, working with our students on the autism spectrum, and we appreciate you and the effort you put out to help them out and make sure that they're successful and to provide them with that support. So a couple of weeks ago, all the stars lined up, and we realized we have a wonderful opportunity to have this special individual here to present to us and to enrich us with her expertise and her knowledge on working with students and young adults with autism. So I'm going to introduce her, and I'm going to read the rest of this because I don't want to mess up. Dr. Jane Deerfield Brown is an assistant clinical professor at Yale Child Study, Yale Medical School, director of College Autism Spectrum, and former director of student services at the University of Connecticut School of Law. She has worked in disability services for 39 years. She holds a doctorate in education from Columbia University Teachers College. Dr. Brown consults with many families, students, school districts, and institutions of higher education. She has appeared on the Good Morning America, CBS News, and NPR. She has also co-authored numerous books, textbooks, chapters, and articles on the topic. Dr. Brown is married, and she has 3 children, the youngest being a 26-year-old son with autism. So it is my honor and privilege to present Dr. Jane Deerfield Brown.
Thank you so much. That's the hardest part for me, is listening to the bio. That's when I want to go out in the hall and say, just call me in later. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm really glad to be back at LA Mission. And I want to thank Araxia for bringing me in, and it was sort of short notice, and I'm so glad that it could work out. And thank you, Larry. I really appreciate being here. I want to talk to you about something I'm really passionate about today, and I know that you all are too, or you wouldn't be taking this lunch hour to do it. So please enjoy your lunch as we talk. I'm going to try very hard not to trip on the microphone. So if you see me concentrating, that's what I'm trying not to do. Okay, there's a wire over here that I really don't want to trip on. And we're videotaping, and no one will ever let me forget it when I trip on the videotape. We have about 45 minutes or so, a little bit more. I have about an hour's worth of information. But what I want to make sure is that you know that I'm here to answer your questions, not just lecture. This isn't about lecture. This is about making sure that you get the information that you need or that you were curious about today. So I'm going to go through slides. If you have questions as the slides are coming up, please don't wait till the end. Please ask during the talk so that we make sure everybody gets their questions answered. I'm going to start with a quote, and I promise I won't read to you the entire time. This is from Steve Silberman in his book Neurotribes, a wonderful book. Imagine if society had put off the issue of civil rights until the genetics of race were sorted out, or denied wheelchair users access to public buildings while insisting that someday, with the help of science, everyone will be able to walk. Viewed as a form of disability that is relatively common rather than as a baffling enigma, autism is not so baffling after all. Designing appropriate forms of support and accommodations is not beyond our capabilities as a society, as the history of the disability rights movement proves. But first, we have to learn to think more intelligently about people who think differently. That last part, to me, is the most important. We need to learn to think more intelligently about people who think differently. We like people who are more like us. It makes us comfortable. When people are different than we are, it makes us uncomfortable. And a lot of us are getting more comfortable with diversity and being with people of different cultures and different backgrounds. But for whatever reason, with people with autism who might act a little different or have some behaviors or speak in an unusual way, we're not comfortable. And that initially we say in our head, something must be wrong. And instead of thinking about it as, gee, if someone is hearing impaired or deaf, we don't say, if you just listened better, you could hear me. And for someone who's visually impaired, we don't say, could you just try harder so you could see this? And can you imagine saying to someone who used a wheelchair, you know, really, you ought to just practice so you could walk. But yet we say to people with autism, you know, you really need to act more like we do, because then everything would be okay. And we have to think about it in that sort of societal way, because that's really what we're doing with this very large population. And I think Steve Silberman does a great job explaining that. So we know that about 35% of the population of people with autism go to college, which is fairly good considering about 50% of the folks with autism are on the lower end of the spectrum, have an intellectual disability. Many are nonverbal, like my son, who's minimally verbal and intellectually disabled. But they often don't fall into the college-capable category. Certainly, they would fit into some of your programming that are non-degree students and certificate programs. You have certificate programs, too. And that population falls into those programs. But for your degree programs, we have about 50% of the folks with autism who are college-capable. And we know that 35% are going to college. So we're pretty happy with that. We're doing well. We know it's increasing because when I started doing this work and research about 20 to 22 years ago, there were only 1 or 2 college programs in the country. And right now there's 70. That's a huge increase. And we also have many programs that aren't considered programs. The colleges just do enhanced services for students with autism, like your uniquely abled program. So there's a lot of increases in the college program, yet we still need to increase this number because of just what Araxia was saying. Right now, the statistics are telling us that for college graduates who are on the autism spectrum, 80 to 85% are unemployed or underemployed. That's a really intense statistic. And that's college graduates, either with an associate's or a bachelor's degree, or even graduate degrees, so that many people cannot get or keep jobs. And that's what we're working very hard on now. We need to increase these numbers because this is from a year ago, and it's the cover of Harvard Business Review, and it says, managing people, neurodiversity as competitive advantage. Companies are looking for our folks on the spectrum because they see the strengths they bring to the workforce rather than the challenges. They see that folks on the spectrum are great with detailed work, are great with focus, and usually very loyal to a corporation, where many people nowadays getting out of college are job hopping in order to, the old adage, which is in order to move up, you have to move out. So people are going out frequently. And corporations like to keep people they've trained. They're more valuable to the organization. And folks on the spectrum tend to be more loyal to one company. One of the ways I really like to explain folks with autism is through some research by Carla Fisher, who's a wonderful, wonderful researcher and a woman on the spectrum herself. And what Fisher explains to us is something she titles Braindrain, which explains that, and I'm going to assume that many of the people in the room are not on the autism spectrum, or what we call neurotypical, and that neurotypical people process about 80% of incoming stimuli subconsciously. You're not processing the cycles of the lights over your head, or the sound of this fan or something, the HVAC above us or above the front of the room. You're not really concentrating on the feel of the fabric on the chairs against your clothes and against your skin, or the feel of the cement floor against your shoes. All of that is information coming into your brain, but you're able to just process it subconsciously. Where people on the autism spectrum process about 100% of incoming stimuli consciously. And it is exhausting. It's cognitively exhausting. It also makes people look very distracted. When we often see evaluations that say this person has autism and ADD or ADHD. And often that really is part of the autism, that people are trying to focus on what they want to pay attention to rather than all this other incoming stimuli. Things like the people and the trees outside and the light coming in the windows and all the other things that most of us are able to block out that folks on the spectrum can't. And sometimes because the nervous system becomes so overtaxed, folks can have autism meltdowns. Has anybody ever seen, either in class or on campus or in your personal life, someone who's had an autism meltdown? I'm seeing hands kind of go up and heads shake. Besides myself, anybody else have a family member with autism? Wow, look around. There's a lot of our hands in the air. It didn't used to be that way, which tells me that the numbers and of prevalence really bear out. Because it used to be when I would do these talks at colleges, there might be myself and one other person. Sometimes if there were two of us, it was like, ooh, let's get coffee. Now, whenever I ask, lots of hands in the room go up, or a lot of us are having that experience. So we know that there's a lot of factors for college success. But every week I hear from parents over and over, oh, Dr. Brown, you don't understand how bright my son or daughter is. And I know that many of our students on the spectrum are really bright. I also know that it's not just academic ability that allows you to be successful at college. We all know some students who are very bright that for whatever reason couldn't make it at college. And we also know students who we really worried about making it at college who did great. So we looked at it. We didn't publish a study, but we really looked at a lot of the students we were working with across the country who had autism and those that didn't have autism, and looked at what made people successful. And we were really surprised. We thought academic ability was going to come out higher. We thought it would be at a 2 or a 3. And what we found is number 1 is what we hear a lot about, resilience, or that grit that people need in order to succeed. And then it was social communication and interaction. The kind of thing like, gee, I missed class yesterday. Can I get a copy of your notes? That's social interaction, and a lot of our folks on the spectrum struggle with that. Then executive function. which a lot of students in general struggle with, and students with autism in particular. Then self-regulation. Can I pull myself together when I need to? Can I get myself together even if things are difficult and do what I need to do? And then academic ability. And we were all pretty surprised by that. You need the academic ability, but you need so much more. So what we really looked at is something that EPIC, the educational policy group, told us in much better words than we could. College readiness is fundamentally different than high school competence. Many of our folks are coming to us with these stellar high school records. And when they have trouble at this next level at the community college, we really wonder what's happened. And often it's because we really don't have good measures. And I'll tell you a little bit about this project we're doing in Pennsylvania. We won't have much time to focus on it. But in the work that we were doing in high school transition for folks on the spectrum, one special education teacher, actually she was a director of special ed for a district, and what she said at the end of our first year is, what I've learned from this, Jane, is we're really good at making people with special accommodations or special needs really good at high school. We're not thinking beyond high school. And that's a lot of what Araxia was talking about with the uniquely abled program. We have to think, as an educational institution and a community college, we have to think about not only what students are doing here, but are they ready for the world outside of our campus? Because that's really what we're thinking about. In this iteration and on this computer, my E got dropped. Pardon the misspelling. So especially for students with autism, why is this important? Students with autism are especially literal and concrete thinkers, are folks like rules and routines and structure. And when they take that structure from being really successful in high school and try and use those same strategies at college, and they don't work, there isn't that same support staff to now reteach new strategies. So this transition is even more important for folks on the spectrum because it's more than just that competence. It's about self-advocacy and self-management. And that's what all of you are working on or seeing in the college environment. So just briefly, and I'm not going to spend time on this, we asked the students we were working with throughout Pennsylvania, those with autism, what they needed help with. And I think this is what you'll probably find from your college classes too. Breaking down large assignments, carrying on conversations with peers, study skills, identifying clubs or social groups of interest, and finding strategies for initiating work / motivating myself to do work. Let me translate. Can I get off the video games in order to do what I need to for my assignments and to keep up in school? And what we found is many of the students could not, without someone standing over them saying, get off the computer, you need to do your work now. Or get on the computer, but off the video game. So a wonderful book that I find is really useful for our students, it's called Awkward, The Science of Being Awkward and Why It's Awesome. Tai Toshiro says, why do you think you have lapses in attention to social expectations when he's working with a doctoral student who says, why do you have lapses in your attention to advanced organic chemistry? It's really true. For many students, they don't understand our need to be social. You all came in today and you knew exactly what to do. You saw a line of people and you said, oh, we must be waiting to do something. You may not have known because you may not have seen the table where Araxia was signing people in, but you knew that you were waiting to do something. You then could smell food in the back, and it was lunchtime, so you all went and lined up. You didn't just cut the line in front of everybody and get what you wanted. And then you found a table either with friends or colleagues or where there was a seat. We call that intuitive social knowledge. You didn't have to stand at the door and ask for instruction of what to do for one of these 12:30 to 1:30 hours. For many of our students on the autism spectrum, not all, but for many, They do not have that intuitive social knowledge and therefore need instruction. And that often to us looks like, well, gee, why would this person be here at the college if they need that level of instruction? Again, we need to learn to think more intelligently about people who think differently. When we have a group like this, many students say to me, are you going to one of those hugger meetings, Jane? And I always, what do you mean? Because I really want to know what the student's thinking. You know, you student services type, you see each other, you hug, you talk, you make small talk, you know what I mean. Because a lot of our folks on the spectrum, that doesn't mean a lot to them. So they don't appreciate what we do, the collegiality, the getting to share a meal together, the getting to sit together and visit and catch up with each other. So we have to change things a little bit in order to work with folks on the spectrum. But the important thing comes from a colleague, Lori Ackles, who runs the Spectrum Support Program at Rochester Institute of Technology in Rochester, New York. College is not an end in itself, but a vehicle towards a goal of employment and career development. And that's what she works very hard on with her students on the spectrum in a co-op program at RIT, because in order to graduate, they have to get a certain number of hours in paid co-op experience. So one thing I just want to briefly go through, and I think in the conference we had last year I did this, so I'm going to do it very briefly, but I think it explains a lot about the students that we're working with in college. IDEA is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. This is a federal law of educational entitlement that many of you may be familiar with, which allows every student in this country free and appropriate public education. The responsibility is the parent and the school, and it's based on success. You can't flunk out of special education. Schools have to modify grades, modify curriculum, and the program has to fit the child. That's what IDEA is about. It's based on evaluation, remediation, and special accommodations in one of 13 federal diagnostic categories. Once you have graduated from high school at either 18 or 22, if you need a transition program or somewhere in between those ages, you now fall under the ADA, or the Americans with Disabilities Act Amendments Act. This is no longer federal law of entitlement. This is civil rights statute of eligibility. You have to be eligible to go to college. There is no special education in college. It ends at high school. It's over, and we don't do special ed at the next level. The responsibility is now the student. And that is always a shock to families, that they now are not going to be advocating, that they are no longer advocate and CEO of their kids' education. We don't base our services on success. We ensure equal access. Very different model. And we provide reasonable accommodation based on level of functional impairment in a major life activity. These are vastly different. And often the students who are coming to us and their families have not been educated about this. This is a totally different model. Many high school staff may kind of know about it, but not know about it at this level. So often we're educating the students and families who are expecting the same level of special ed services. The other piece that I think is important for all the staff and faculty who work here to know is that many of your students that you're working with who have accommodations are coming from a system where the special education teacher, the resource teacher, or the autism specialist has a caseload between 20 and 30. That's about the number of students they would work with. The average disability service provider in this country has a caseload between 150 and 600. I would think, is that about what you have in DSPS? 250? 250, 300 here at LA Mission for each professional in disability services. Where I just came from at UC San Diego, they had between 350 and 400 per professional. I've done a lot of work the past couple of years for students with autism at Berkeley. Each of their people in DSPS had 525 for a caseload. So we're not working with folks every week. We're not, so often faculty or staff are saying, why isn't DS just telling us about these folks, and then we would know better how to work with them? Often they don't know them, either because of the numbers or because for every one student that's documented and disclosed to disability services, there's one or two on campus that haven't told anyone. And right now you have about 120 people registered at DSPS. That tells me you have another at least 120 to 240 who have not told anyone. So that makes it difficult to provide services to people we don't know about, who aren't asking for accommodation, which is the basis of the law. Questions on any of this? Anything you're thinking about or wondering about? Yes, go ahead. Just yell if you can. IDEA is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It's the federal law that governs special education in this country. And it goes from really after birth to 3 services, right through high school graduation, whether that's at 18 or between 18 and 22. Yes? Exactly. Yes. Yes, frequently. I don't think we've done it here. If we have, Aroxia would have to remind me, but you probably do something at orientation about students with disabilities, or somebody from your offices do?
We'll have staff at some of our key events, our kickoff events. We'll sometimes be able to address the entire faculty and staff, but a lot of times it's in breakout sessions. And then we do a lot of outreach into campus to describe what we do and the eligibility requirements and those sorts of things.
That's great. That's great. We often do things with other students because that is one of the things we're concerned about, because as we're saying, this is a social issue. Right now the CDC is saying 1 in 59 people who are born right now will be diagnosed with autism. And the numbers you're seeing, the first year students that you have here, are from the group of 1 in 68 from a previous CDC study, because they look at students from 8 to 12 years old. And the upper class students are from the 1 in 100. So your numbers will continue to increase. So we really look at this as a societal issue because of just what you're talking about. The reaction from other students, and the other large group that we often don't talk about, is the siblings. Because for every student that you have on campus with autism, they have 1, 2, 3, or 4 siblings. And the siblings may be on campus and the student, their sibling with autism, is not. Well, when everybody is rolling their eyes or sighing or, really exasperated that the student is asking yet another question or acting out in some way, how does that make all the siblings feel, knowing, wow, that's the way my brother gets treated, or that's the way my sister gets treated? That's a real impact on our campus. So that's why we really treat this as a very social issue and try and get to other students to talk about civility and acceptance. Yes?
I just had a question with regards to the frequency of autism. Why are we seeing the higher numbers now than what we did when I was in elementary and grade school in the 80s and 90s? Was it undiagnosed then, or is there a higher frequency of causation or reasons for the causation that we see now?
Yes to all of the above. We really don't know. I can tell you that there are more people diagnosed now that previously either they were just diagnosed with a developmental disability, or if you were really, really, in those days, and I'm a lot older than you are, but when I was in school in the 60s and 70s, there was a room down the hall that is the place where my son would have been. But for everybody else who could manage classroom academics, they were in class, and if somebody acted odd, you were just taught to be nice to them, but they didn't get a diagnosis. You know, we didn't have IDEA then. IDEA has changed things a lot, and so a lot more people get diagnosed at different ages, but what we're seeing now is a lot of people with autism get diagnosed in college. The prevalence has definitely increased, and that's what is looked at through everything. We look at well, not me, I don't do that kind of research, but people have looked at the water, at the air, at the food, at the genetics, everything, and they're not finding a purpose that would cause this drastic increase. But we know it continues to increase, and there's two counties in the country, Orange County, California, which I'm bad with my geography, I need help. Is that around here? South, okay. Yesterday where I was, it was north, that's why I asked first, and Bergen County, New Jersey. And right now, when the rest of the country is 1 in 59, both of those counties are 1 in 34. And so they have intensely studied those counties to figure out why. And when the rest of the country was 1 in 100, they were 1 in 63. When the rest of the country was 1 in 68, they were 1 in 50. They have always been a higher prevalence. We really don't know why. We do know the evaluation is better, and we do know that we used to only diagnose very severe people. Yes?
Would you mind sharing a little information about the role potentially that MMR vaccinations are playing in terms of the proliferation of autism that we're seeing?
Absolutely none, yes. The person who did that study, and no matter how many things they do to discredit that study, there's still people out there not getting vaccinated because of autism, and it makes absolutely no sense. The person who did that study has admitted in court he made up the numbers out of his head. He's lost his medical license, he's not allowed to practice, and yet people won't vaccinate their children because they might get autism. What they did before they found out that this totally irresponsible doctor who is changing, really putting their children's lives in terrible danger, before they found out that he was making things up, they took the Thermacell, which was the preservative that he said initially was causing autism, and they took that out of the vaccines, and the numbers continued to go up. So that initially made them look at him and his work and say, well, wait a minute, what were you talking about, and how did you come up with these numbers? And he finally had to admit that he made it up. And it's still out there that people think vaccines are causing autism, but no, they don't. They never have, and they still don't. It's just when kids get the vaccines are when the symptoms of autism start to show. So people needed a connection because of, we're all trying to figure out why. Same thing, why is this new polio-like virus showing up across the country? And nobody really knows why, but we always try to look for a reason. So, other questions? Yes. Go ahead.
Thanks. Okay. So I failed to answer that question fully, and I wanted to make sure that you all know that something that's happening on campus that's really great. It's that we started a mental health awareness club. One of our students who's been connected with DSPS for quite some time took the lead on that. And the whole angle with that club is to reduce stigma as it connects to mental health. And certainly with folks on the autism spectrum, there's stigma. And this club is doing a great job. In fact, they're out there for Club Rush today, trying to get the word out. So I just want you all to know that they're out there. Dr. Chris Williams, myself, Araxa are all kind of advising the club. So it's a way for sort of peer-to-peer connection to make sure that kind of everybody's getting on board with this idea of reducing stigma. So I forgot to mention that.
That's wonderful. That's really great. And that is the best way to do it, peer-to-peer. That absolutely is the best way. One of the things that we talk about within folks with autism is called theory of mind. This is work done by Simon Baron-Cohen, a professor in England who's one of the foremost authorities in the world on autism. And what he explains is that there's 3 components to theory of mind. That you can understand others' thoughts and feelings and motives as being different than your own, the capacity to read those and then being motivated to respond appropriately. And that these pieces that are missing in a lot of folks with autism, or that many people with autism struggle with, may be the core deficit. Now, I say that knowing that if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, and each person is very, very different. But many people really struggle with taking someone else's perspective. And so it's hard, and that can really affect some classroom work when we're having classroom discussions and people have very different points of view. Because often if I don't understand that you don't share the same thoughts or feelings that I might have, then it's difficult to have a good academic discussion. But we know at college that academic standards are enforced, conduct codes are enforced, and adult expectations are enforced. At the college level, we don't modify grades, we don't modify curriculum like they do in K-12. It's a very different setting. So let's talk just briefly, do we have any English or writing faculty here? A couple. So I'm going to talk just briefly about some people with autism are really wonderful writers, but some of our folks really struggle. So sometimes when there's papers, students really have trouble about writing synthetically, or faculty will say it's like bullet points, it's not a narrative or an essay. And sometimes students struggle with understanding plot or compare and contrast in an assignment. That can be really difficult if I can't take someone else's perspective, or having to write a personal perspective as an essay. So our students can really struggle with long-term assignments if they aren't broken down, because someone's always been breaking things down for that student, and they may need help and strategies to do that, and sometimes struggle with essay exams. So some of the things we want to do, if you're giving essay exams, if it's possible, you may want to have an oral supplement. You may want to meet with the student to find out what they meant by some essays that they're writing or exam questions that they're answering. You may want to, if it's appropriate, and it doesn't fundamentally alter your class, which is the basis of ADA, you may want to see if you can give alternate assignments. You may want to. If you know, I hear a lot from faculty that, gee, when this student participates in class, they are absolutely on point. But when I get that work from them, it just doesn't match the person that's been talking in class. So sometimes we really need to look at whether the student just is struggling in an area that is hitting their disability. We can't necessarily change the class, but we may be able to accommodate in some ways if it's appropriate. Sometimes voice input helps. What many students don't realize is that going from brain to typing is a different part of your brain than going from brain to mouth. So that many of us speak at a different level or with more confidence than writing. And some of us write with more confidence than speaking. But it depends how your brain works. But if you are a person who is more comfortable speaking than writing, then voice input is the way to go. And I don't know why so many students really have trouble trying voice input and adjusting to it before they come to college, when the writing demands are more significant. So we really need to work with our younger students to get them adjusted to using voice input earlier. Group projects. Anybody have group projects in your classes? Yes. Oh yeah, I'm seeing hands. This can be really trying for our folks on the spectrum. There's a huge social component to group work, but here's the important thing. I'm seeing way too many IEPs that say student is exempt from all group work, all assignments done individually. That's got to come out if people are headed to higher ed, because there are few, if any, employment opportunities left that you don't have to work in a group. So you've got to get that practice not only in college, but in high school, where you can learn strategies for how to work in a group and what to do when it gets more social than you would like it to be. So sometimes it's choosing partners. Some of the hardest things for our students is when faculty, or even in a physical education class, somebody says, okay, get into groups of 4. Because often it's our folks on the spectrum that have nobody to group with, and that we want to change. Dividing the tasks of what to do. And then managing the timelines, even just the proximity, having to sit up close and personal with a group if everybody has to study together or work together. And then it's all the social skills. But this bottom piece we have to be concerned about people being bullied or being the bully in a group saying, you know what, I'll do the project and I'll put your names on it. You guys go meet and be social, I'll do the work. That's as much of bullying as it is being bullied. And we have to be careful of that. So sometimes selecting the groups in advance or giving a breakdown of tasks, and we really need to monitor the group dynamics. Only in extreme situations do we ask the student to work alone, and that's got to be extreme. So I know I'm running out of time, which I knew I would, but I want to direct things a little bit about how you can improve things in your offices. Are a lot of you staff? No? Some staff. Are some of you faculty? Faculty? How about everybody else? Students? Okay, I don't know who's here. Do you, Araxia? Do the rest of you, do you work here? Are you community people? Where are you all from? Like this table over here, where are you all from? I'm sorry? Faculty? Oh, staff? And the next table behind? Student workers? And staff. Okay. So in our offices, one of the things that we can do that really helps, because what we usually do in any of our offices is either sit across from a student or we're standing over a counter and looking at a student. And we know that eye contact is really difficult for a lot of people with autism. It makes a lot of folks anxious. So the best thing we can do is not command eye contact. If you know someone seems uncomfortable with having to look at you or is sort of talking to you looking here, just because someone has trouble doing what makes us comfortable, we need to not make the other person look at us. So if you're meeting with a student, instead of meeting face to face, have your chair next to the person. It doesn't have to be really close, but just next to at a comfortable distance and have something in common to look at. A schedule that you're helping the student with, or a bill if you're in financial aid, or the registrar's, or the bursar's office, or whatever you're doing. But by having something visual to look at, it takes the pressure off having to look at faces. Making things structured and visual is really important. The majority of folks on the spectrum are more visual than auditory. In higher ed, we do a lot of this. We do a lot of talking. And for a lot of folks on the spectrum, they need the visual to reinforce the talking. So we make it more visual. I do a lot in my office on whiteboards, because that way I write on the board and the person doesn't have to look at me. And I can make notes, and then I have the student take a picture of it with their phone. I don't want the student to say, can you write that down for me? Because then it becomes my responsibility. I don't want the student to say, can you email me these things? For two reasons. Again, it's my responsibility. And number two, we know most students don't read their email. So why would we do that? But if I have things that we're working on in an appointment and I have the student take a picture, they have it with them. And that's a strategy not only for college, but that's something people can take into the employment setting. And that's what we're working on, those strategies people can take into the employment setting. So I do things in a very visual way, working with people. So I'm showing you this as an idea. You may use some version of this, but I just have these things on top on a whiteboard in my office, because many of our folks with any disability, but especially our folks with autism, have had decision-making sort of taken away from them. Someone through junior high and high school, or middle school and high school, has always made the decisions or chosen the courses or known better than the student and has made decisions. And we really want students to have that decision-making power given back, but they have to learn strategies for making decisions. So often when students are coming to us with an issue, we have to determine what that issue is and then identify the problem. In this, it was, I'm lonely, I don't have friends, and I don't know how to join a group. And then we determine solutions, who can help, and what skills do I need to use or learn. I'm making it structured, and I'm making it visual. And that can really help in your offices. A lot of what our students are struggling with is this executive function or future planning. And so we try and teach routines, like the previous chart. We teach routines and we make things visual. I'm going to skip this for now in the interest of time. So we try to integrate students naturally with classmates and roommates and with student groups. That's a great way to integrate students. And then sometimes we have what I call contrived connections. We have mentors, we have social groups, which we call anything but social groups, because every college student will say, I'm done with lunch buddies, Jane, I don't want any part of it. I'm not going to social group. But when we call it different things and we get people together, it's often really helpful for everyone. My favorite is one that's done at University of Colorado called Quirky Solidarity. And it's always full. It's a great name, and a lot of people just either with autism or social anxiety or other challenges on campus get together and can do things together and feel comfortable. One of the biggest issues for our folks on the spectrum is the transition to a very different schedule. Most students in high school are booked 12 to 14 hours a day. They're up at the crack of dawn, they're off to school, somebody's telling them where to be each period during the day, then they've got their activities, or they have some therapy appointments or doctor's appointments, or they have their karate classes and their anime clubs, and then we hope 2 or 3 hours of homework. We're talking 12 or 14 hours a day. And then they come to college and they have somewhere between 12 and 15 hours a week. And there's no one directing the structure in between. And that's where a lot of students really have trouble, is needing someone to impose that structure in the free time. We talked a little bit about overstimulation, and we know that that's a lot of the cause for anxiety. Before, especially during the lunch hour rush, when these doors opened, the noise you could hear filter in. It's that kind of environment, or out here with the smells of the cafeteria and the noise of the talking and the dishes clanging and the groups of people sitting and eating. That's a really overstimulating sensory environment for many of our folks to get through. I've talked about a lot of this in social issues and about anxiety. But we know that successful students really understand and accept their disability. And many folks on the spectrum either don't know they have autism, or if they do know, they're not telling anybody. And that tells me either they don't accept it or they won't accept any resources. And that makes it difficult, and we know that successful students do use their resources and their help. They also know what does and doesn't work for them. And they're very internally motivated. We talk to way too many students who say, yeah, I don't really want to be here, but my parents are making me. And that we know doesn't work. You have to be internally motivated. And they're good self-advocates. They're advocating for themselves even when mom and dad are trying to take over, if they're trying to take over. So the students need to learn more about autism, or ask themselves questions, and they really need to find resources on campus so that they can use their passions. And our universities and colleges really need to do just what LA Mission is doing: provide programming, provide support, provide training like we're doing today. But we need to prepare the students earlier, and we need to prepare the families earlier. And we're doing that this afternoon. But we have to do more of that than we're able. So these are some of our books, and I'll just leave it on my contact info, and let's take some questions while we have time. What else are you thinking about? What are you questioning, or what didn't I talk about that you really came to hear? Somebody raising a hand in the back, or is it? Yes, go ahead. I know. Yes. I think if your son is academically capable, then the more you can allow him to be independent, that's what's important. Being independent, being able to structure time, being able to work on his own, but also taking away some of those big time accommodations that just don't happen in college, that do happen in high school. and learning strategies for how to function as an adult. One of the things I usually try and start working with families and students by 8th or 9th grade. And one of the things I really try and embed is the idea that the goal is not a degree. So many families are stuck on, well, if they can only get a bachelor's or only get an associate's degree. The goal is not the degree. The goal is independent, successful adults. That's the goal. If college is included in that, wonderful. If it's not, we have to find ways to help people learn to be competitively employed. So I think the best thing you can do as soon as your son is old enough, at this age in middle school, he needs to have a lot of chores at home and a lot of responsibilities. And if he doesn't do them, there's got to be consequences, which is often hard with our kids on the spectrum. And I know from experience. And then as soon as he's old enough, he needs to have a job. He needs to be responsible to someone that's not mom or dad or a teacher, because we find that over and over. We find so many folks on the spectrum that are very academically capable, and they have absolutely no work history. And employers tell us again and again, they will hire someone who has a work history over someone with just a high GPA any day of the week. If you've got a 3.8 or a 4.0, but you've never worked, it's really hard to get a job. That's it. Yes. And Boy Scouts is great for a lot of our folks on the spectrum because there's structure. I know what to do in order to earn that next level and that next level, and that's a great outlet for a lot of our folks. Yeah, thank you. Other questions? Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yes, go ahead. Sorry, couldn't see you.
So I'm actually a case manager for a program that works strictly with young adults transitioning from high school to college.
Oh, wonderful.
Thank you. And if you know, you have to be have a learning disability to be in the program. One of the issues that we've come across a lot is finally when we talked to them and motivated them to seek out, like to register with DSPS and all that. We have where sometimes professors think that there really isn't anything wrong with them because they don't look like your typical person that you expect to have ASD. So we've actually had professors where like they'll out the student in class, and then it really discourages the student from using the accommodations after that.
Absolutely. I'm sorry you've had that experience. People that have invisible disabilities often report that people either don't believe that they have the disability they're saying, or that that they struggle to get accommodation. Being outed should never happen in a classroom, in a public setting. That should just never, ever happen. Besides the student being a good self-advocate, the one thing that we often say is we have a couple of fact sheets that sometimes when they're talking to a professor, we have them bring a fact sheet about autism or Asperger's. I know Asperger's is no longer in the DSM. Many of the students we work with are much more comfortable with Asperger's as a term and a label, and so we still use it at college. If folks were diagnosed when they were young with Asperger's, I'm not going to tell them, you can't call yourself Asperger's anymore. That's silly. And if they're more comfortable with that, so we have fact sheets that we often give faculty, but the student has to give it to the faculty member. And then the student needs to say, I would appreciate if you would not out me in class, and this is confidential information. You're not supposed to let it. I know that's really hard for a student to say, but they ought to definitely report that to DSPS, because faculty should never be outing students in public. But I think the more that the student can be confident about their strengths, the easier it is to talk to a faculty member about here's what I need and here's why, and here's more information. And I would like to think at this point that faculty know DSPS would never be affirming an accommodation and you send accommodation letters or emails. They would never be sending that unless it was a legitimate need. And I would think faculty here know that. But so
I really like your suggestion about bringing in a sheet.
And I'm sure if Aroxia or Larry have that sheet, if not, I'll make sure they have it and that can help. Great, thanks. Other questions? At time, yes.
When it comes to behavior in the classroom, disruptive behavior, we know it may be part of the disability clearly, but are there sort of best practices or things that faculty can be thinking about and how to intervene?
I'll give just the basic tips before we lose a lot of people. The best thing you can do, if somebody's interrupting a lot and asking questions, the best thing you can do is just directly say to the student, you can ask 2 questions per class. After 2 questions, you're done. You may have to use a visual for that. It may have to be just a sign with your hand, but no more than 2. It's taking too much time from everyone else, and everyone in the room is paying to be here. If a student is doing things like pacing in class, that's got to be contained in some way. That's disrupting the environment for all the students who might have a learning disability or ADD or ADHD, and they're totally distracted by the student who's pacing in class. If they have to leave class for a moment and come back, that's one thing. If the student's vocalizing in any way, sometimes you really need to have that talk with the student and DSPS about sensory things that we can do to keep down vocalizations, because some students just naturally vocalize and there's no way to stop that. But we can sometimes do some things with sensory items that can help curb that. The quick ways that we usually tell faculty or suggest to faculty about students talking too much is using cards that the student just has index cards, and I usually use a red laminated card. And the first time the student talks, they put it in their backpack. Second time, they put the second card in the backpack. No cards, no talking. So it's something tactile, it's something sensory, it's something visual, and that way you know. And if the student talks and there's no cards, they're asked to leave class. There has to be a consequence. And that's what I sometimes find faculty are uncomfortable with. They want DSPS or the staff to take care of the issue. They don't want to deal with it themselves. And I think that's sometimes the challenge, because we need it to happen in the classroom. And I know it's difficult. Are those the kind of things you were looking for? Okay, thank you. I know we're out of time. I will hang around and answer some questions if you have them, if you didn't want to ask them in the big group. Thank you so much for taking your time today, and thank you for all you do for students with autism.